Good evening. You're listening to another Mothman podcast. We're your number one source for sci-fi and paranormal podcast.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast, Instagram, Twitter, and many more. And you can also find out more about our services at mothmanpodcast.com.
As you can tell, most of our episodes are filmed at night because I'll say good evening or good night to everyone. But tonight, we're actually going to be doing some podcasts from letters that came to us from our listeners. And we want to thank the ones that have written in and encourage you guys to continue to write to us. And we will be more than happy to put them on the air for you and listen to your stories. And like I said, we will give your name if you wish, or do not give your name if you wish for us not to. So with tonight, we're going to start with a letter that came in to Amanda. And Amanda, would you go ahead and take your letter and talk to this person?
Yeah. So this letter is from Jerry in California. And he says, I'm going to just read his letter. He says, "Hi, Amanda. I listened to the Mothman podcast on the Ouija board, and I wanted to tell you about a good portal which I encountered using the board. When I was young, I would always sleep with my door shut. Later, when I was older, I believe I found out why. When in my mid-teens, I usually went to bed around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I shared a room with my older brother, John. One morning, I awoke at 5 o'clock. As I looked up, I saw what appeared to be a white, glowing figure of a man coming into my bedroom. I looked for a moment and then quickly closed my eyes tight and rolled to my side because I was afraid and I hoped he would leave. As I lay there, I could feel his presence standing over me, and I actually heard heavy, shallow breathing coming from him. It seemed like hours passed before the alarm went off for me to get up. I mentioned nothing to my brother at first because neither he nor I believed in ghosts. In fact, none of my family believed in ghosts. Anticipating their reaction, I changed my story a little before I told them. I described the whole event as a dream. I was very surprised to hear my mother say that she had also had the same quote-unquote dream. She still calls it a dream to this day. My wife, Joan, also had strange encounters. I told her of the ghost I had seen and that the ghost still haunts my parents' house. She decided to pull out the Ouija board one night and asked who the ghost was and what he wanted. I watched for a couple hours as she asked questions and wrote down answers. The board never identified the ghost, but to our shock, my grandmother came through, and she mentioned things that my wife could never have known because my grandmother had died long before me and my wife had met. One thing that startled us especially, my grandmother mentioned that I was going to carry on the family name. Me and my wife looked at each other in awe, and she put the board away. A month and a half later, we found out that my wife was pregnant, just as my grandmother had told us through the Ouija board. There was no way either of us could have known she was pregnant at the time. 9 months later, our son was born. We never tried the Ouija board again, but I am a true believer in the afterlife. Amanda, I can't wait to hear your comments on my experience with the Ouija board." That's a great letter, Jerry. Thank you so much for writing in. And I did want to say that we did hit kind of hard on the negative experiences people have had with the Ouija board, and that it's not something we would play with ourselves kind of thing. But I do want to admit that I have read of positive experiences with the Ouija board. Jerry's is a really good example, and that it predicted his son's birth. And I know that there are also many, many mediums that use the Ouija board. And I mentioned it in the podcast, but I didn't really make a good hard point of it. I think that's really the proper use, is to have a medium contact one person. So if you're going to use the Ouija board in a really positive way, you need to be contacting one single person. And like, you might want to go in and say, I would like to contact Grandma Susie, and you use the Ouija board to do that and see what comes through in that manner. So there are safe ways to use it. There's safe ways to have a Ouija board. And I really appreciate Jerry writing in to tell us about his positive experiences, because I definitely think it needs balance.
I agree with you 100%, Amanda. And people just need to be careful when they go. A lot of times these kids open up these boards and they try to open a portal with the bad side or the dark side. And
like they're antagonizing.
Right. And if you kind of get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Same theory goes here. So you just got to be careful what you do. And again, thank you for that letter. That was a positive side on a dark subject. But, back as you will probably listen to our podcast on the Ouija board, you heard back at the start, it was accepted by the religious groups. And it was really...
it wasn't really a negative thing until the mid-1900s.
Mid-1900s. And I think here again, if we go in and start trying to find the dark side, that could have caused it to change its whole perspective.
Yeah.
And again, as you also heard that it's all started with the Exorcist. The media had a lot to play on the dark side also.
Yeah.
So
good point.
There's a lot of things that took place there.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a letter coming to us from Samantha Williams from upstate New York. And thank you, Samantha, for submitting your letter. This is a really sweet letter, and I wanted to share this with our listeners. It starts off with, my parents were inseparable. Where you saw one, you saw the other, and they were very much in love. When my mother died, my father became very grief-stricken and went from 200 pounds down to 115 pounds. I was always my mother's favorite, and she always had a nickname for me. She always called me Strawberry. One night, when my mother had died, and she'd been dead for approximately 2 years, I was awakened by her voice, and I heard, "Strawberry, Strawberry." "Yes, Mother," I answered. I spoke so loudly I woke my husband. "You must have been dreaming of your mother," he said. "I heard you mention her." "I wasn't dreaming," I protested. "She called me, and I love and know her voice." A few minutes later, I heard Mother call again, and I answered. My husband suggested at that time that I sleep somewhere else so that he could get some rest. So I got up and laid down in the living room in front of the fireplace. I just settled myself when I heard my mother call again. She spoke lovingly in her normal voice, a very familiar voice. "Don't be afraid, Strawberry. In 2 weeks, I'm coming for your father. I came back to tell you so you won't be frightened when it happens." In the morning, I told my husband about the incident, and he scoffed me at my story. 2 weeks later, my father came to visit me. The next morning, when I carried a breakfast tray to his room, was going to surprise him and put a breakfast tray at his bed, I found him unconscious. I was frozen with panic, but I remembered Mother's words and grew calm. Father remained unconscious for over a week, and the doctor told us that the end was near. I was standing at his bedside with my husband, his cousin, his pastor, when suddenly Father opened his eyes. He looked directly at me and said, "Clearly, daughter, step aside. You're standing in front of your mother." We all turned and looked, and there was nothing behind us. The pastor took my father's hand and said gently, "There isn't anyone here, my friend." "Yes, she is," my father said firmly. "She has come to take me home to our house where we lived for 35 years. At that time, I moved aside so he could see my mother clearly. "My," he sighed, smiling, his face a very familiar smile. "How wonderful you look, my dear," looking past us. He looked at me and stated, "I'd be glad to stay here with you," and he then apologized to me, "But I'd rather go home. We'll go soon now." A half hour later, he died. At my father's funeral, the minister told about this incident and said, "I'm not a spiritualist, but I really believe she came back and took her beloved husband home." My husband pressed his hand against my hand and told me he believed so also. I'm now a true believer that dead can talk to the living. I hope you think my story is worth passing on. Samantha, I do think your story is worth passing on.
What a sweet story.
It really is. It really is. And and there's a lot of stories out there of people talking to people who are no longer with us, that our loved ones come back and communicate at times in our lives.
One of my favorite documentaries is it's a documentary in a hospice, and the people that the almost dead are seeing, and they'll say like, "Oh, I see my mother," or "Oh, I see, my wife," or whoever. And there's this one part where the nurse, the doctor came out of the room of a very sick patient, and he said, "Well, I think he's going to make it at least another 2 weeks." And the nurse didn't even look up from her magazine she was flipping through, and she just said, "No, it's going to be in the next day or so." And the doctor said, "How do you know?" And she never even looked up. She just said, "He saw his wife yesterday." So those nurses know.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. And, things happen at the end of a life that people become, it comes clear in their mind.
Yeah.
Here again, through the old hypnotherapy, I think people are finally closed down their conscious mind so that they can see the subconscious mind. And through our subconscious mind, we can see things that we can't see with our conscious mind.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Things like that happen. Well, we're going to have another episode where an individual sent in a email which states about a contact from a loved one who had passed away. But I think we're going to try to talk to you a little bit more about the parallel universe and things of that sort when we talk to about that write-in. So we hope you liked tonight's podcast. We appreciate you guys, sending in these emails.
Please email us. We want to hear your stories, and we will feature them on the air.
And so, again, thank you for listening to us. Without you guys listening, we're wasting our breath. So please continue to listen to us.
Yeah, we've picked up listeners all around the world lately.
So, Amanda, good night.
Good night, Darrell. And guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Follow us on all of the platforms, and check us out at mothmanpodcast.com to see about our other services we offer.